One, two, three, four.
In this tutorial, we'll be talking about Triggermatic. Triggermatic is a new type of object introduced in Newton 4. I've got these text objects that are animated in rotation and position, and we're going to use a contact in Newton to trigger these animations. This contact can be a direct contact with the object, or it can be another object that triggers the animation when it comes into contact. So let's run Newton here. I'm going to put this object in dead because I don't need it. This object here, I'm going to set it to static. Here, I've got other objects that are going to fall. I don't need precision, so I'm going to set them to use convex hull. I don't want them to collide with the rest of my scene, so I'm going to remove the collide with. I'm going to increase the gravity. I'm also going to increase my substeps, which is extremely important for contact detection, and we'll see how it goes. Yes, I'm also going to add a bit of bounciness to these objects. And now if I run my preview, so I've got my objects bouncing off my red object, and that's it. Now we're going to select my text objects and I'm going to change their type. I'm going to set the object type to Triggermatic. In Trigger at the bottom, I have two options. I have the first option, which is its sensor, the object that will trigger the animation, and then a loop type option. So the sensor for these objects will be this object here. Simply select it with the eyedropper. And then I'll define the different loop types. This is cycle. This one is ping pong. This one is continue. And this one is offset. I can also set these objects to use convex hull for better performance in my simulation. We'll render 500 frames. And see what it looks like in After Effects. So the cycle object, its animation cycles, meaning that when it finishes its animation, it immediately returns to its first position. The ping pong object will reverse its animation on each contact. Continuous. On first contact, it will start its animation. Then, each time there is contact, it will move forward a little in the continuity of its movement. And offset. It will continue its animation each time, making an offset. Note also that if there is a contact while the animation is running, this contact is ignored. The trigger must therefore no longer be in motion. So, in concrete terms, what can we do with this?
1, 2, 3, 4.
In this example, which you can find in Newton 4's samples browser called Trigger, we're going to break down how this scene was created. I'm already looking at what I have in After Effects. So I've got various objects that are animated that go up and down, which I'll label orange to find them. I've got an elevator here. You can see its animation here. I'm going to put it in peach. And then I've got some walls. I've got a bumper here and various objects here that I'm going to use to trigger my letters. So how do you set up this animation in Newton? I don't need to separate my shape layers. Here I am in my scene. I'm going to select my walls. So I'm going to select this set. These objects are static. These objects are also static. And these objects, this one and these are triggermatic. You can assign them with the R key. I'm going to increase gravity and increase my substeps. So what I want is that when my ball arrives in the elevator, that the elevator starts up, which means that my triggermatic, it simply has to be triggered by itself, and its animation is a cycle that goes up. We've seen that in After Effects, its animation is already predefined. It goes up and down. So all you need to do is cycle it. In principle, it should work by itself. So maybe there's not enough gravity, or maybe my ball went too far. I'll try again. And that's it. There, it's not bad. So for the moment, I've got a regular movement. Maybe we could do something about it, i.e., there's just too much automatism. I'd like my ball, when it bounces, to be able to go towards other objects. So there are different ways of doing that. You have to animate something. You need a value to change over time. I suggest, for example, to animate the bounciness of this object. I can create an animation here. I'll add 2 keys. For example, add 2 keys to 15 images. The first will be at 0, 1. The second will be at 0, 6, 0, 7 even. And then I'll ask this animation to play ping pong. So in fact, my bounciness will go to frame 0. It's at 0.1 at frame 15, it's at 0.7 and at frame 30. It will again be at 0.1, etc. So that's going to create a bit of chaos. Can you see yourself there on the first shot? It's not the same at all. On the second, it's the same, creating yet another different dimension. And that way I can create a natural look in this animation. So the aim was that when my ball comes into contact with one of these objects, it triggers my trigger letters, which are here. So I'm going to take my first object, and then I'm going to go to trigger, and I want to say that its sensor is this object here, and I'll do the same thing for each object, so that each letter has its own sensor. Let's see what happens. And so we can see that now, every time my ball collides with one of the blue objects, it launches the animation corresponding to the object that collided. So we could make a small modification. For example, if I want my objects to keep going up, I'll simply select them. I'll remove the last animation keys. I'll change that to linear. I'll go back into Newton and select these objects. Then I'll go to trigger. And this time I'll select offset. As you can see, with very few manipulations, I can create animations that are automatic and complex. Let's render to see how it looks in After Effects. Here's a practical example of what you can do with Triggermatic.
1, 2, 3, 4.
In this last example, we'll take a look at the pinball scene. It's a scene you can find in Newton 4 in the samples browser. And like the previous scene, we're going to dissect this scene to find out how it was constructed. So let's take a look at what I've got in my composition. First of all, the animated objects. I've got 2 animated flippers, and then I've also got my launcher, which also has an animation, and the rest is fixed. So I'm going to launch Newton. I'm going to start by selecting all my objects that are in red and set them to static. Then select the same thing for my blue and green objects. So that's it for now. Next, these star objects. They're supposed to rotate as the balls pass by. So you can see that here I have a null object underneath. So if I select the whole thing and put a pivot, it will create these objects that will rotate on their axis. Now I'm going to increase the gravity a little. And above all, I'm going to select all my marbles by color, and I'm going to increase their density. Because these balls are metal balls, they're supposed to be dense. And now let's take a look at my Triggermatic. So my first Triggermatic is my pusher, the object that's going to push my marbles. So I'm going to put it in Triggermatic. It has an animation that's predefined in After Effects. So every time a marble comes into contact with it, it's going to trigger its animation. I forgot to increase the precision of this object. I'll set it to maximum. And then there's another object here. That is a gate. So I've got two objects here, and I'm going to join them with a pivot. And this pivot, I'm going to move its axis by, and I'm also going to set a lower limit so that it can open. I need to put substeps here. I'll put 10. And we'll see what happens. This object must not collide with my contour. I'm going to put it in B, and this object won't collide with group B. We didn't take care of my yellow objects. The first thing I'd like to do is, when my marbles fall here, I'd like to slow them down. If you've watched the Waterlike tutorials, you'll know what I mean. If not, I suggest you follow the link to see it. We can turn this object into a Waterlike and then cut the lift completely. On the other hand, we're going to increase the drag to the max. And then I'll add 10 in density, and you'll see when my marble gets in there. This object also has to be static. So if I put these in static for now, what happens? Well, it slows down. It creates a speed bump. So I can delay my animation. And finally, the last part is my flippers. Why did I put these objects in front? Well, naturally, when you're playing pinball, when you're going to trigger your pinball animation, not when your balls hit your flippers, but when they're a little bit in front of it. That's why I created this object. It's because I want to use it as a sensor. Instead of my ball touching my yellow object to trigger my flipper, these objects will trigger my flippers. So I'm going to take my flippers. I'm going to set them to Triggermatic and go to the Triggermatic options. And I'll say that the sensor is this one. And the same for this one. But these objects here must not interact with the rest. I just want to have contact. I don't want them to interact with my simulation. So what I'm going to do is use the Waterlike option. I'm going to completely cut the density, lift and drag. And now we'll see what happens. You see, I've got my animation triggered when these objects approach. Not in contact, but just approaching my flippers. Maybe I'll lower the collision tolerance to make it a little more precise. So the sensor objects, they don't interact at all with my simulation. They're just going to serve me, in fact, to detect the passage of objects over them. Two little things. I'm going to select these objects and I'm going to increase angular dumping. I'll set it to 2, for example. And then my green objects, they have to give energy. So I'll set the bounciness to 2, meaning they'll give back twice as much energy as they receive. When my objects collide, I created an extremely complex animation. It was created in just a few minutes. We're going to render it in After Effects. It's like creating an animation that lasts more than 30 seconds and it's all totally automatic, with lots of collisions and extremely dynamic things. I hope you enjoyed it, and now we finished with the Triggermatic.
1, 2, 3, 4.